All right, here is your explanation for imperialism in Africa. So, prior to imperialism in Africa, Europeans were familiar with it, but not the, they were about 10% familiar with Africa. And the reason why I say 10% familiar with Africa is that they kind of kept to the coasts. Since the 1300s, they had been kind of traveling around the coasts, um, kind of setting up trade stations all around the coast here, but they were not able to get to the inside of Africa per se. They weren't able to come in and see these different groups of people all throughout Africa for a few different things. All right. They were really, really hard to get to because either you had to go through rainforests in the middle of Africa, or in North and South Africa, you had really, really extremely hot deserts that were very hard to travel through. And so the only accounts that we're going to get of what the inside of Africa really was like were from the Western explorers or the missionaries that were going through there trying to spread Christianity previous, uh, prior to imperialism. Really, the first time that imperialism starts in Africa is this guy named King Leopold. So he's the king of Belgium, all right, and he kind of sees the possibilities of what Africa can bring him, all right, not what they can bring to Belgium, but what they can bring to him. All right, this is going happening around the Industrial Revolution time, where all of Europe is getting industrialized, and he saw the prospect of how much money he could make off the natural resources in Africa. All right, so the two main ones were ivory, but the one that I want to focus on is rubber. All right, he would go through with his little army here that had guns. People in Africa at this time did not have guns, so they had superior firepower. All right, they would give these people a quota of you have to bring um, so many buckets of rubber back every single day. And if you don't bring that quota of buckets of rubber back to us, you're going to get your hand chopped off. All right, this is what this picture is of to the right here. That's King Leopold's face on the snake because they're constricting uh, the Africans here. All right, and basically forcing them to do as he pleases. He forces uh, the local tribes to sign some papers. They have no idea what they're signing. And what these documents do is they give the land to King Leopold, not just to the empire or the Belgian Empire, they give it straight to King Leopold. So King Leopold is directly benefiting and directly profiting from his imperialism in Africa. All right, he tells people that he wants to spread Christianity, and that's the reason why he's going down to Africa. But in reality, so that he can get rich and profit off the Africans. And when he first starts doing this, people don't really know what's going on, but eventually they're going to start finding out. All right. Does it look like this guy here looks like he wants to help spread Christianity or he wants to help the people in the Congo? No. He looks like he's just there to profit off of these people. All right. The picture on the right here is pretty shocking. These are the people that would get their hands chopped off because they weren't able to find enough rubber. All right. And you can imagine the competition for rubber became pretty fierce because if you only could fill 10 buckets of rubber from the rubber that was in your tribe's area and they told you to get 12, you're going to have to go to your neighboring tribe and steal rubber from that tree. All right. And so things happened. Maybe you weren't able to get the 10 buckets of rubber or 12 buckets of rubber or whatever you had, you could get your hand chopped off. All right. And it's not just people in Europe just sat back and watched this happen. They didn't really know what was going on, but eventually they're going to find out, and they're not going to be okay with this. They're going to be horrified by that. But really, what ends up happening because of this, though, yes, Europeans are horrified of what King Leopold has done, but they're also very, very intrigued by how much money he's made and the prospect of their industrialized countries coming into Africa to utilize the resources just like King Leopold did. And that's exactly what they're going to do. All right, this thing called the Mad Scramble for Africa. This is when all of these European countries are going to scramble to grab their own piece of Africa so they can utilize it and make a bunch of money off of the people. At the Berlin Conference was when all of these European leaders decided to divide up Africa just like a piece of cake. Everyone would get their slice, all right? So France would get this little piece, Spain would get this piece, Portugal, Italy, Germany, Great Britain, and Belgium. All right, everyone would get their piece. Now, the big thing to note at this conference, though, there were no African leaders. These European leaders had never been to Africa before. They might have heard about it, but they've never been there. They know nothing about Africa and the way that the people are. All right, and so they just divide it up like a cake, see the profits that they can make, and they just go along with it. All right, and so almost every square inch of Africa is going to be very quickly taken over by the Europeans. All right, look at the map to the right. This is all the different ethnic groups that were divided up. All right, so these different ethnic groups, they might be civil, but they also might be very, very hateful towards one another. They might not get along. All right, and the Europeans have no idea what the heck is going on. They don't know about all these ethnic groups. All right, so you have the Ottoman Empire up here. You got the British starting over here. All right, and then all of a sudden, Africa's gonna look like this. All right, all of these ethnic groups thrown into huge territories where they're going to be forced by the Europeans who have superior weaponry to live together, to work for the Europeans' profit. And some of these boundaries too today, some of these borders are going to lead to the borders we still see today. All right, here we go. Borders of today. Borders created in 1914 here is what this map is of. 1914, 1960. So I went from this to this to this. So still even today, we see the impacts of imperialism in Africa. You're going to notice though, in this last picture, I'll go back a slide here. Every place is going to get divided up here, except for Ethiopia. All right, so we got Italians here, British, Italian, French, Spanish, French, and so on. The only one that you don't see with a European name is Ethiopia. Ethiopia's king saw what was going on. He kind of saw into the future a little bit. And so what he started doing was he bought weapons from basically whoever would sell them to him. So he bought them from the Russians, bought them from the French. And so when the Italians arrived with just a few thousand troops with some guns, just thinking that the Ethiopians would kind of say, okay, we surrender. The Ethiopians had over um, they had over 100,000 soldiers waiting for the Italians to arrive. And so the Italians lost. It was a really, really embarrassing defeat for the Italians. And now, eventually, after World War I gets over, the Italians are going to come back in and be able to overthrow the Ethiopians with more modern technology. But for the time being, Ethiopia was the only African country that successfully resisted imperialism. And don't you dare believe that the Africans just kind of lied down and gave up. Look at all these different resistance movements throughout Africa. There is probably not a single imperialist state that didn't have some type of resistance movement in it. All right, Africans are going to resist, and they are going to resist hard and often. All right, but for the time being, they're not able to successfully have some uprisings. And also, don't think for a minute that everyone in Europe and around the world thought that imperialism was a great thing and they supported it. This is a cartoon called The Sleeping Sickness in 1911 that would be published in newspapers and they would be published in magazines. And this is from a European newspaper talking about how poorly the Africans are being treated by these European leaders. All right. And so it's basically calling out these leaders to quit treating them so poorly, to quit taking advantage of them, and so on. All right. So the summary here is so the split up of Africa was very, very organized by the European leaders. All right. Europeans claim they're in Africa to help these people become civilized and to become Christians, but they're really just there to get rich. Revolts and uprisings were also very, very common.